Hello everyone, and welcome to tonight's show. My name is Peter Linares. I am your host, and I am a member of the Republican Town Committee and have been a resident here in the town of Bridgewater for the past 25 years, where with my wife, and we brought up two children who are now young adults. With regards to our agenda, I will first talk about the election that occurred on November 8th, where the counting of the votes began on October 31st and does not actually end until November 18th. Next up, we will have Ed Ivaldi from the Bridgewater Cares Committee, who is opposed to having retail marijuana shops in the town of Bridgewater. And so we'll hear from him and what his side of the story is. And next we'll have Bill Wood, who is also a member of the town council, to speak on behalf of the Alternative Compassion Services, aka the ACS, to discuss why the ACS and why he also thinks we should have retail marijuana shops here in town. In our final segment, we will be with one of our favorite Republicans, and that is Jay McMahon, who ran for Attorney General in Massachusetts in our election on November 8th. Unfortunately, to my dismay, Jay did not make it into office. He and I will discuss his thoughts on where do we go from here and what does the future of Massachusetts looks like, in his view, with the elected officials that we now have in place. Let's first begin with some information about the results of the Bridgewater voting pertaining to the state elections. As you may know or may not know, I am one of the Republican town registrars. There's two of us here on the Republican side as well as the Democrat side that hold this position. I was at the polls the entire day helping the Bridgewater residents find their precincts and was there from 6 a.m. till 9 p.m. at night. It was a very long day, but it was rather exciting as well. Here is what I saw as the tabulation tapes came out of the ballot machine. For all of us that came in person to vote, the Republicans won in every category. When all the tabulations came out of the early voting, which includes mail-in, the margins became very thin, so some Republicans did not fare well, while others were hanging on by a thread. So I'm just going to move down to the paper here. So for example, because I have more of the details here, Deal came out ahead by about 3 votes, Jay McMahon by about 500 votes, and then Angelo, Cruz, and Wright all came out winning as well. Then the counting continued over the course of the next few days, and I do have some official counts shown on the screen that I received on 11/16/2022 from the town clerk's office. Let's see here. So as you can see, Deal, McMahon, D'Amelia, Cruz, McDonald, and Sandra Wright won in the town of Bridgewater, some by narrow margins. With regards to the questions, all of them came in as a no, except for question 2, which is around the dental insurance. There was 9,945 ballots were read by the voting machines, and 230 ballots were counted by hand. So this was a total of 10,175, which is about 54% of the turnout for us in the town itself, which is very good because I've been through a couple of other election days and the percentages were a lot lower. So I was happy to see all of you there. It was great. There were 4,775 early voting requests with 609 mailed ballots that did not get returned. 20 ballots were rejected for a variety of reasons. It could be the ballot envelope was not signed, the ballot envelope was not enclosed, there was a failed delivery, or they moved out of Bridgewater, and they were possibly registered in another town. There were 4,146 that voted early, 923 voted early in person, with 3,223 voted by mail, 95 absentee voting records, 18 absentee not returned, and 77 voted absentee. 5,952 voted in person on election day, and I was there. I'm sure I saw most of you pass through. So again, thank you for doing that. Please also note that the early voting and mail-in costs, so the early voting as well as all the mail-in ballots that come in, actually costs our town thousands of dollars in postage, tons of paper, and personnel to watch over all the tabulators. I don't think anyone realizes this, so when they started with the mail-in, it really has increased how much it costs our town to actually process an election. As well, there are hours and hours in many steps that are all additional in order to make the mail-in and early voting possible. Again, I only mention this because it's a huge cost to the town versus you showing up in person, and it's said and done in a matter of minutes, and there are no additional steps required to process your ballot, costing the town thousands of dollars less. Okay, so with that, we're going to move into our topics, and we're going to start off with Ed Ivaldi, move into Bill Wood, and then finally with Jay McMahon. So here we go.
76% of employees have struggled with at least one issue that affected their mental health. When you share, you're not alone.
Hey, next up we have is Ed Ivaldi, and he is with our Bridgewater Cares group here in Bridgewater. And he and his group are, as well as Ed, are opposed to having the retail shops here in Bridgewater. So we are going to hear his side of the story. So welcome, Ed, and thank you for coming tonight.
Appreciate that.
Thank you. What have you got for us? Let's hear your side.
Okay, well, I can maybe start with a little bit of background just to educate people a little bit on this. So
Sure.
There's two categories of marijuana, medical and recreational. Neither are currently regulated. So that, it's still illegal at the federal level as well. Our president opposes it. And Congress is divided on whether or not it should be, legalized.
Yeah, I think I knew that.
California was the first state to legalize medical use in 1996. Since then, 38 more have legalized medical use. Colorado and Washington were the first states to legalize it recreationally in 2012. And since then, 19 states were added recently, including Massachusetts in 2016. Just one point that this expansion of marijuana throughout our country is being funded mainly by big tobacco companies. I think that's something that everybody needs to be aware of.
I didn't know that.
The Massachusetts state legislature, when we voted in 2016, gave all 351 municipalities the ability to opt out. And that was basically meaning we could have local control over whether or not we wanted to allow the sale of marijuana in our town.
Oh.
So Bridgewater as a town voted no in 2016, but subsequently passed zoning and bylaw changes that basically banned the recreational sale of marijuana. So today it looks like this from a Cannabis Control Commission perspective. They do a survey of all the cities and towns around the state. 140 municipalities have total bans, so that's 40%. Of all the cities and towns in the state. 212 or 60% have some sort of zoning in place that allows some form of sales.
Okay.
So just to give a perspective of where things sit in the state right now.
Okay.
So Bridgewater has two medical dispensaries on Elm Street, Theory Wellness and ACS. Now since 2018, there have been numerous discussions started at the town council meetings about whether or not we should be lifting the ban that we have in town. And the primary reason for lifting that ban has always been money. Like we're not, we're giving up on the potential revenue that we could be getting if we allowed it in our town. We have 5 towns bordering our town. Middleborough and Halifax today both allow the sale of recreational marijuana. Mm-hmm. West Bridgewater, East Bridgewater, and Raynham currently have bans, and they have no plans to eliminate those bans. Oh. So throughout this period of time, since 2018, at these town council meetings, there's been many citizens, including medical professionals, substance abuse counselors, public safety officials, and other people giving personal testimonies about how bad they think lifting the ban would be, or allowing the sale of recreational marijuana in our town would be. Few, if any, proponents have ever spoke at these meetings. It's been mostly people that have been speaking against it.
Okay.
A non-binding vote was held back in last year, 2021, to gauge whether there was interest in the town's perspective about whether to allow recreational sale. The vote of that non-binding was 1,079 citizens said yes, and 800 plus said no. So the majority said yes, but that majority was only 6% of the registered voters in our town. So a very small perspective of voters turned out and actually said yes to that. So from our perspective, that's sort of a statistically insignificant number. So despite all the information that's been provided to the council over the last couple of years, not only is people speaking at the meetings, but also a lot of studies that have been given to them concerning health issues and other issues that people are seeing across the nation, the council decided in December to put it before the voters and let the voters decide.
Okay.
So that's kind of where we are right now.
Okay.
Bridgewater Cares opposes this for several reasons. The first is really for public health issues. We don't think that, having another drug, the increase of the availability of another drug in our town is a good thing for our town. In fact, we feel that it's counter to what our values are in our town.
Okay.
Today's marijuana is actually engineered up to 100 times what it used to be. For example, THC levels, when we were kids back in the 70s, ranged in the 2 to 5% range. So it was comparable to alcohol back then.
Okay.
All right. Mm-hmm. THC today, grown as a plant, can be as high as 35%.
Is that because of the manipulation of the plant
Yes,
itself?
they've genetically re-engineered the plant. So
Oh.
a plant can grow now 35% THC.
Oh.
Beyond that, they can turn the plant into a liquid form, which then raises it up to 65%. And then beyond that,
Is it filtered? Is that?
I don't know how the process is,
okay.
but they turn it into some
Got my
sort of a
curiosity
liquid.
up now.
And then beyond that, they actually make solids and out of it. And at that
Mm-hmm.
point, they can actually get it up to 100% THC.
I see.
So the marijuana that we grew up with is totally different than the marijuana that
So
you see
similar to
today.
beer, they can adjust the potency of the marijuana itself.
They can.
Depending upon what they're using it for.
They can. And as I said earlier, there's no regulation around that.
I see.
So that's one thing that is happening. Now in Europe, for example, any marijuana that has THC over 16% is considered a class 1 narcotic. So heroin, cocaine,
Oh.
all those drugs, if you have THC levels over 16%, that's the category that
does-
fits into.
Does Massachusetts have any regulations around that?
No,
Oh.
no.
Well, that's interesting.
No. So one of the things that we found out through all the studies that we're seeing, and there's a lot of data out there right now that you can look at either at the national level or at state levels across the country, that it's pretty concerning. So one of the studies that we recently looked at said that any area that decides to sell recreational marijuana, they will see approximately a 20% increase in use of that drug in that area.
Okay.
Okay, so that's one thing to keep in mind. 1 in 6 teens, youth, will become addicted, basically. They're saying, even though it's not sold to the youth, we all know that they're going to get their hands on it somehow, some way.
1 in 16.
1 in 6 teenagers
Oh.
will become addicted to it.
Okay.
Okay, so if you look at the high school, we have 1,400 kids in our high school. So that 1 in 6 is 16%. If you look at 16% of 1,400, that's 234 students that are at risk of becoming addicted. That should concern every parent in Bridgewater. Suicide attempts. There's a lot of data out there now around suicide attempts. 7 times more because of marijuana. People, because what it does, marijuana affects your brain. Different than alcohol, different than tobacco. It affects your brain in ways that causes people to become more depressed. Psychosis sets in, schizophrenia. There's a lot of different mental issues that people are discovering across the nation that are resulting in higher suicide rates.
I see.
Yeah. Heart problems, testicular cancer in particular with men. They're also finding that in couples that are trying to have kids, if either the husband or the wife uses marijuana, miscarriages double.
Oh.
So what we're finding, or what people are seeing, is that marijuana is the biggest contributor right now to mental health and substance abuse problems across America. So given that, we can't ignore all that data that's coming out of these early adopter states like California, Colorado, Washington, and other states. We can't ignore it. How foolish are we if we do? It doesn't say we're going to experience immediately, but over time, we're going to start to see the same things happening in our state that are happening in those other states. So do we want that?
Right.
And we're saying that it's going to be harmful to our community. Do you have any questions questions, I can keep going, or
No, you can keep going.
Okay.
I find this interesting. I didn't know all these facts, so
Okay.
it's been pretty good.
So health
I
issues-
was just, I think when you were talking about, the mental health, so it sounds like it's, with suicides and stuff, it sounds like if you're a user, then you would, it seems sort of like a brain chemistry change of sorts that's causing these various issues with humans or whoever state users, right?
Right. Yep.
Okay.
Yep. Public safety issues are another concern that we have. The statistics show that drug driving incidents will increase. In Colorado alone, there was a 32% increase in drug driving incidents.
Do they have ways to handle that in the town?
They don't have like a breathalyzer test or anything like that. Our law enforcement people have no way of really telling.
It's blood
if somebody,
only, right?
I guess.
I think it is.
There's
I'm
no
not
way
sure,
that there's
yeah.
no way they can tell on the spot that
Yeah.
someone is under the influence or not.
Oh, okay.
Marijuana combined with alcohol increases impairment up to 8 times. So they're finding a lot of people that will go out and have a couple of drinks, then we'll smoke a couple of joints. So eight times now compared.
It is a trip for you.
For every one marijuana-related death, there are 0.7 innocent deaths. In other words, pedestrians that are hit, bicyclists that are hit, people that are experiencing injuries because of that.
Okay.
The other thing I want to point out is that this is a cash business right now.
Oh.
So any of these shops either take cash or a debit card.
Oh.
So because of that, states that have seen crime rates increase because these centers, since they're dealing in a lot of cash, they are targets for robberies. So robberies will increase and crime rates will go up near the facilities. The black market. Even one of the selling points of this early on was the black market was going to go down when legalization happened. They're finding that just the opposite has happened. And the reason being is that the black market, because it's legal now in the state or the area where it's legal, the black market can come in, they can undercut the pricing because they don't have to pay taxes.
Taxes, yeah.
So they'll hang out near the pot shops and they'll sell to people at half the price because there's no so
I didn't think of
so
that, yeah.
that has happened as well. One thing that I would like
and
to
the black market is everywhere, really, even here in Bridgewater, right? Already.
It is right now.
Okay.
It is right now, but it might increase.
I see.
Tax money has been like the main push behind this. And one of the things that is never discussed is what are the costs. The town council has been presented with all kinds of information around additional costs that would be incurred, but they've never discussed it, they've never looked into it, they've never acknowledged it. In Colorado, they found that for every dollar taken in tax revenue, they spend $4.50.
Oh.
And those expenses include, additional police, health issues that, hospitals, schools that they have to have extra people on for counseling.
So this is the town spending that extra money?
Yes,
Oh,
yes.
I see.
Right, yep. There was actually a study done by the town of Haverhill, Massachusetts, and they were potentially going to open 3 recreational shops.
I see.
They hired an outside independent firm to do a study, and that came back, that study said that they were going to have to spend $157,000 in one-time costs to establish enough resources to cover the police, medical, and whatever. And then after that, it was going to be $1.3 million annual to be able to handle the costs associated with those 3 pot shops that they were going to put in.
Okay.
So to say that there's a lot of revenue coming in, you've got to look at the costs. You've got to look at what's offsetting. And now if the revenues don't meet the costs, then you got to raise taxes to cover those costs. So there is potential that there could be a tax increase here related to that.
We have about 2 minutes left.
All right. So in terms of wrapping up here, I do want to say that almost every medical association opposes recreational marijuana, and that includes the American Medical Association, the Cancer Society, Epilepsy Society, American Academy of Pediatrics.
Is that because of all the issues with the
medical
brain
and health issues, and
see.
there's still so many unknowns about what this is doing to the body.
Okay.
One other thing is secondhand marijuana smoke. They found is much worse than tobacco smoke. So if you're living in a high-rise apartment that has a shared ventilation system, and your neighbor down below or above you or wherever is a marijuana user, you may be getting some of that secondhand stuff into your apartment, and that's going to hurt you medically. So We've got a lot of concerns about this that have not been addressed. The costs are one, the health issues are another, and we just think that more time needs to be taken. The council needs to go back and do more homework, more due diligence on, is this really a good thing for our town?
Okay.
It shouldn't be just about the money, you
Okay.
know? So community health and safety, and just really looking at the fact that this is another addiction for profit industry that big tobacco is pushing across our country, and we need to be careful.
I didn't know that fact.
Yep.
All right, well, Ed, thank you very much for coming in tonight. And as I said to the Bridgewater residents, I do want them to come out and vote on January 7th to, have them decide.
Very good.
Okay.
Thank you for having
Ed.
me. Appreciate
You're
it.
welcome. All right.
As a parent, I think it's tragic that 1 in 5 children struggles with hunger right here in America. But there is hope. Visit feedingamerica.org to help. Together we can solve hunger. Together, we're feeding America.
All right. Hello, everyone. And up next, we have Bill Wood. He's from our town council, in case you don't recognize him. And he is here to talk about the marijuana retail shops here in town. And just so you know, he's an advocate for having those shops here in town. So, Bill, welcome. And why don't you give us a bit about your side of the story as to why you think we should do this?
Thank you, Peter. Just a quick reminder about voting on January 7th, because not only is the question on the ballot, but there are 8 counselors on the ballot as well.
Right.
And so, it's important to get out. It'll be hopefully a nice day that day. But the ballot question is really one that is modeled after the exception that the state put into the legislation when the voters voted back in 2016 to make recreational marijuana legal in the state. And so when they did that, the state legislature put in an exception that if there is a town or city that already has medical marijuana and they are engaged in business by July 1st of 2017,
Okay.
remember the vote happened in 2016. In 2017, they actually codified the law, and they put an exception into 94G that said if there is already an existing medical marijuana treatment center engaged in business, that you could not prohibit them from changing over to retail.
And when did the store open here in Bridgewater?
So opening is part of the definition. So the Mansfield case, the Supreme Judicial Court decided in the favor of the medical spot there. And in the language of the decision, they define engagement in business by several other cases. So you don't actually have to be selling the product to be engaged in the business.
Okay.
You have to have your paperwork in place. You have to have things. So it's firm facts that they'd already been to the planning board, both sites. They already had plans approved. They already had their provisional licenses. So by this SJC court decision, they were engaged in business at that point.
In 2017?
In 2017, by July 1st, 2017.
Okay.
Right. So the question that's on the ballot is actually modeled after that, because trying to avoid lawsuits and that sort of thing, the exception is pretty explicit, and the Mansfield case covered one half of it. And so when you read the question that's on the ballot, and it talks about just the conversion of the 2 medical spots, then it's really addressing what that exception addressed in the explicit form, and gives the voters to say, yes, we see that there's an exception. We're going to allow these 2 businesses in Bridgewater to convert over to retail if they so choose.
All right, so that's all at the state level.
So the 94G is at the state level. The question is modeled after that exception.
Okay.
Right. So when you look at the language of the question, it's a little bit different than last year's question.
Okay.
Last year's question was a little broader in the sense, and last year's question brought out 11% of the voters, which is twice as much as any normal town vote.
I'm sorry, so just for clarification,
Sure.
what was last year's?
Last year's was a non-binding question, and it basically said, does Bridgewater support allowing retail marijuana?
Okay.
And so that question is a non-binding, won by 57%, had 11% of the vote turnout.
Okay.
Right. So my position has been recorded many times. It's very, very clear. So at the core level of Bridgewater's town government and town, the budget process is different than the state level and very different from the national level. So because of Proposition 2.5, we're extremely limited on revenues, right? And so when we talk about the budget process itself and we break down the budget, year after year, about 60% goes to the school system and 40% stays on the town system, right? And so this year, in this year's fiscal budget, we have about $200,000 in host agreement money from the medical marijuana spots. That host money will be disappearing. And so some people say it's only a small amount, doesn't matter, but it really does, because in a downturn, what happens in that 60-40 divide is we, by law, cannot stop paying the school. So we cannot decrease any of the school budget that we've assigned. So that 60% stays hard and fast, and most likely the next year it increases. Any decrease, that $200,000 decrease on the total budget, comes from the town side. And $200,000 is worth a position or two out of public safety or highway, right? So my position over the years has always been, we need to look at additional forms of revenue, right? So the town itself had a very close vote in 2016. The town had a 57% positive vote last year, non-binding. And if you look at overall dynamics of perception and things like that, the country has shifted its perception and is more in favor of retail marijuana.
Okay.
Set aside some of the other issues, but when the question came into town council, we were assigned as a budget committee, and it went to FinCom to talk about it's really risk and benefit, right? So from your house, it's a 7-minute drive to Panacea on Route 44, right? From someone on my side of town, there is a store 1/3 of a mile outside of Bridgewater, right? 1/3. So, and there's stores close by.
What side of town are you on, Bill?
I'm over on Hayward Street, so I'm.
Oh, okay.
On
the Halifax side up there.
Yeah, on the Halifax side.
Okay.
Right. So the availability of retail marijuana right now is easy. You literally, from any spot in town, can drive. And I measured from Roach Brothers parking lot, for example. There are 4 locations within 8 miles, right? So it's no more difficult to go to a retail marijuana shop than it is to go to Home Depot. And in fact, for me, a shop is closer than Home Depot, and for many people, it's pretty nearby. So the decision whether to buy or not buy is not created. There's no barrier in access, right? So the risk of introducing is then diminished, right? And then when you talk about some of the other aspects, medical marijuana in town has been here for 4 years, and many people don't understand the difference between medical and retail, right? And so one of the key differences is that with medical, you need you pay a fee and you get a card. And now the fees have dropped, so it's basically $120. You make a phone call, you go to an over-the-phone interview, they sign off, you get your card. If you're feeling a little anxious,
to get the medical.
Medical, right?
Okay.
Right. So the offset is now basically anybody can get an MMJ card, right? So the offset is, okay, so if it's going to cost me $120 here, is that worth it versus over here where I'm paying a 3% tax? Because retail is taxable, medical is not.
Right.
And so for someone who's consuming just a little bit, maybe they're having an edible at a football game, watching football on a Sunday afternoon, or maybe they're enjoying it just like a couple glasses of wine or maybe a beer. You can easily go into a pub and have a couple pints. A lot of people now are treating it like that. the old idea of like hippies and all the other ideas that grew out of the 60s, those are passé. The typical customer now is a lot older, is sometimes using cannabis to sleep better, is sometimes using cannabis to muscle relaxant when they have muscle pain or joint pain. I know someone who uses it to control chronic pain. And so the use and the demographics of those that are buying cannabis has changed greatly over the years.
Okay.
Right. So what we did in committee was we talked about benefits and risks. And so one of the benefit to the town, and this is using today's numbers, and no one has ever said this is not correct,
Okay.
right? Is there's a potential of over $500,000 in new revenue.
Okay.
And it's about 536, and that's like having 2 new Home Depots come to town for taxes. So no kids, we're not supporting a bunch of new kids because an apartment building went in. It's a business that typically doesn't have that much traffic actually. In the beginning days, Wareham made the news because they were renting out parking lots and stuff. You go by Wareham today, you can park right next to the shop and walk in.
You're talking about the business for the retail shop.
Yeah.
Wasn't phenomenal at the time it opened.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Now there's enough shops that it's more like if you could equate it to maybe a fast food joint, not McDonald's, because McDonald's has lines wrapped around their building at 2 a.m. But maybe a Taco Bell or something like that. So the potential for new revenue is over $500,000.
Okay.
And that's going to be year after year after year, not a one-time thing.
Mm-hmm.
That's built into the structure of the law. It's not going to disappear like the host agreement money. Charlie Baker signed law this summer that eventually makes all the host agreement money disappear. And a lot of towns are now challenging it because when we talk about risk, like Brockton, you say, oh, there must be a lot of crime near the pot shops. They do not see that. They don't experience that. They don't experience in Boston. Boston made headlines this week because they're actually going to return all their mitigation money. And so,
the mitigation money, that's the host money, right?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And so even with a retail shop, you create a mitigation money fund. And when the next thing we looked at was looking at responses to Theory Wellness and ACS.
Mm-hmm.
So you got to remember, although it's called medical, it's still marijuana. Mm-hmm. They're selling marijuana. They have a customer base. People are consuming it. 2 of the key differences are that on medical, you can have a much higher level of THC and much larger quantity of marijuana than you can on retail. It's very, very controlled. The other thing is that a lot of people point out is crime. So we looked at Wareham, and anybody can ask me. I've got copies of this. It's a public document now. If you look at Wareham, which was one of the first stores open, the crime rate actually drops from 2016 through 2019 while the shop is in place, right? So the idea that there's crime, being created by these shops just doesn't. It's not happening there. And then, so what additional costs over? So,
the crime, I think with crime, there's a lot of factors that play into how it fluctuates from year to year. So how do we actually know it's the shops or not? Like, I don't.
That's true. So that's what goes into the mitigation. And that's why the shops are saying, you can't pin it on us, so why do we have to pay more when your liquor stores aren't paying anything?
I see.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
So the liquor stores aren't paying anything. The restaurants that may overserve aren't paying anything. So the marijuana shops are saying, we're no more risk than those establishments. Why do we have to have mitigation?
Okay.
And so when the towns and cities try to prove that they're riskier, it doesn't show up. And so when we talk about risk, the risk model, it's not elevated above any other town that does or does not have retail.
Okay.
And so the other thing that happens is the black market. The street pot is still like half the price. Mm-hmm. So there's still a lot of availability there. So when we talk about risk within the boundaries of Bridgewater, and people say, well, if we have a retail shop replace a medical shop, we're going to have all this availability. The availability is there today if you want it.
Okay.
And so we're not actually increasing risk. in any way, because 1/3 of a mile outside of one side, there's a shop there. A couple miles outside the other way, there's a shop there. Having a shop in the middle doesn't actually increase risk.
So Bill, we're down to about 2 minutes left.
Okay.
Do you have any sort of summary or some things you want to end with?
Well, the summary is, that the ban itself stays in place for everything except the 2 medical shops.
Okay.
So by voting yes, you're not voting retail on every corner. You're not voting retail downtown. You're not voting retail anywhere else. You're just voting yes to say that the medical shops, which are now losing business because more and more people are shifting over to retail, can engage in retail sales as well. And that's the limit of it. That's the limit of question 1, is that the shops are already established. They're already doing business. They are an established small
So
business.
if there's more shops that open in the future, what would happen in Bridgewater?
So Bridgewater would have to change the ban in the future.
Oh.
So the overall ban stays in place. We create an exception for these 2 shops modeled after the exception that's in the state law.
Okay.
All right?
All right. Well, thank you very much for coming and
All right.
giving us your side of the story. And
All right.
we'll hope all of you voters come out on January 7th and make your decision. And thank you again, Bill, for coming in tonight.
Thank you, Peter.
All right. All right. Welcome back, Jay. So great to have you here tonight. So,
Peter,
all right.
Good to be here with
Yes.
you.
So sorry about what happened in the elections. From the bottom of my heart, I'm sorry.
Yep, me too.
All right, so I would like to talk a little bit about what's happened and
Okay.
the results of the elections and like some of the things like what are you thinking about? And one of the questions I've written down here is, and it's sort of twofold here, like, where do we go from here? And what are your expectations regarding some of the consequences our citizens here in the Commonwealth will face given the winners in this past election?
Okay, well, I'll tell you what. Let's just start at the top with the governor because that's important. People have elected Maura Healey as the governor. At least it appears that way. I'm not going to be an election denier. I'm just going to say that the mail-in ballots are what swung it in every city and town in Massachusetts. Many cases, I was up on my opponent. In a lot of cases, if the election was decided by the voters on election day, I would have been the Attorney General elect.
I will say, Jay, you won here in Bridgewater.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so the point is, it's the mail-in votes, and everybody's got questions with those. And until we get election integrity in this state, no matter who wins, people are going to always have an issue and not trust the results. We need voters to trust the election process. And the only way to do that is we need a process in which the voters feel secure. For instance, if you're voting from 7 a.m. to 8 p.m. on a particular day, and you're presenting an ID, and you're required to have an ID, voters will have trust in the integrity of the system, even if their guy loses. But if you have these things coming in, mail-in ballots, and you have people going in on election day, and they're being told they already voted when they hadn't, now those create problems that you can never get over. You can never explain that away.
Right.
And that's the problem we have here. Florida doesn't have this problem. You vote on the day of the election. Now, you can do an absentee ballot like we did for 200 years in Massachusetts,
Yes.
but this early voting, it's no longer election day, it's election month. And voters have a problem with that. And when they do, when the electorate does not trust the electoral system, you will have no faith in the outcome of the elections. And that's the problem we're having here in Massachusetts. So when we talk about what some of the consequences, so Maura Healey is now going to be the governor, and she bragged during the election that she shut off natural gas pipelines into Massachusetts.
I heard that.
Now, folks, let me just say this to you. When you have someone who is acting with dictatorial powers, who arbitrarily shuts off the natural gas flow to Massachusetts, we got a serious problem when it comes to getting natural gas here. So now it has to be shipped in. So it has to go through Boston Harbor. It's got to be shipped in, and there's tremendous costs attached to that. Now, I understand, only because she said this, I understand her rush to want to go green. But our infrastructure won't support that getting green by next year. It's going to take some time. And we rely on natural gas to stay warm in this winter. So what's going to happen is the price of natural gas will double because of her arbitrary action. Mm-hmm. And we already have electric rates because we don't produce electricity in Massachusetts anymore. It has to come in from out of state. And she's given them a hard time just to bring it in here. So, folks, I don't know why you continue to elect this woman either as the Attorney General or as governor. She is making it difficult for working families and people who are on fixed incomes. Mm-hmm. So it's going to be a point this winter with electricity prices already doubled, gas prices are going to double because she's shutting off the pipelines, and the Wall Street Journal says home heating oil will double this winter. People on fixed incomes and working class families are going to have a grim decision to make this winter. And that decision is going to be eat or heat, but they're not going to be able to do both. Now, right now, Peter, the economy is tanking, and it's tanking for this reason. Families do not have disposable income like they had a couple of years ago. Now, folks, disposable income is after you get your paycheck, you pay your rent or your mortgage, and then you pay for your food at the local store, the grocery store, and you pay for gas in your car to fill it up so that you can go to work this next week and get your paycheck at the end of that week. When there's no money left, what you used to have is called disposable income. It's not there anymore because you're just paying just to live to the bare minimum. And so what happens is when you can't go out to restaurants and stuff like that anymore because you don't have any money, those people, those businesses begin to fail, and this is what causes hyperinflation. And so that's what we've got going on right now. So what we need, to be honest, is people who understand we need utilities, we need the prices to drop on gas, electric, and oil. Now, how do you do that? Well, you do that by being friendly to the utilities, making it so that they can produce more and deliver more into Massachusetts. They're not doing this because they want to be mean. They're doing it because they are completely restricted by these dictates from Maura Healey. So there's a problem right there that we're going to face, and we're going to face it quick this winter.
I know, I've already seen the pain. Thank you, Jay. I agree with all of that because I read things about it as well that is happening with the pipeline as well as everything. I mean, I think they're just trying to switch to green with a switch versus building infrastructure and making it work for individuals over a long period of time.
If they became commercially viable, they wouldn't have to worry about cutting off all these sources. These sources would go away on their own.
Right.
But they're not doing that, or they can't do that because the technology hasn't reached yet.
Right.
So to try to go green now, basically they're saying we don't need natural gas. If you shut off natural gas, people will freeze. The economy in Massachusetts will grind to a halt. Mm-hmm. We know a little something about the economy grinding to a halt. 2 years ago, most of the businesses in Massachusetts were deemed
non-essential.
Non-essential. Can you imagine a government telling you your business is non-essential?
I couldn't believe it because I'm like, the government's not allowed to. It's government. It's we the people that rule over that. I don't get that. I never got it.
And I'll tell you what, of course I come from Cape Cod, so they might as well put two banners, one on the Bourne Bridge and one on the Sagamore Bridge, said, closed for business, see you at the bankruptcy court.
Right, exactly. Well, you mentioned a lot about Maura Healey. What about Campbell?
Andrea Campbell,
yes.
She is now going to be your new Attorney General. Let's talk about qualifications, because that's important. Now, most of you know I've been a lawyer for 35 years. I'm a litigation practice. I'm the kind of lawyer that goes to the courthouses and tries the case, convinces a judge or a jury, whatever the case may be. So I've been doing that for 35 years at every level of court in Massachusetts, state and federal, and also before boards and commissions, federal, state, and local. Andrea Campbell, on the other hand, has only been a lawyer for 5 years, and that with the Deval Patrick administration. Basically, she was a government lawyer. Her specialty was education, whatever that means. She has no clients. She had, the way you can tell if somebody has a practice or an active practice is by their malpractice insurance coverage, which the BBO, the Board of Bar Overseers, those are the people that control lawyers, they list that, whether you have it or not. When she's listed, she has no liability insurance. That means she has no clients.
Wow.
She has no active practice. So she's never been in a courtroom, never had a case, never represented a client.
So how can she be connected to the people?
I'll
She's
tell you
connected
what.
to the government.
So I guess I got to say this. The problem with Massachusetts, and maybe most of the nation, is people don't pay attention to the qualifications. When somebody is running for office, they are saying to the people, I want you to employ me.
Yeah.
I've got the best skill sets.
Right.
I mean, that's what you're saying.
Right.
And with the Attorney General's office, this is a law firm with over 500 lawyers, another 500 employees there. So it's a large firm. So have I had management experience and dealing with large firms? Oh, I have. I was the payroll manager for Cape Cod Hospital. They had over 2,000 employees, and I was part of the management there. I was on human resources and also labor relations. So I mean, I actually enjoyed. That was a fun job. I actually enjoyed it. But I went on to become a lawyer and do all that instead. But I've had I've also been in other corporate positions. So I've had 12 years of corporate experience before I became a lawyer. And you try to make the case to the voters that she's got zero experience in any of this. I've got this experience here, and I've said it plenty of times in debates. Well, we only had one actual debate because she wouldn't do any more.
Oh.
And then you point out not only qualifications, but you also point out other things like affiliations. For instance, I've been supported by the 2 top law enforcement unions in the United States. Actually, the Fraternal Order of Police is the largest law enforcement union on the planet, and they supported me hands down. And also the New England Police Benevolent Association. They're the second largest, and they supported me. They didn't want to support her because she doesn't support the police. Now, can you imagine running for the top law enforcement position and say, and she hates the cops?
Yeah.
And you might say, well, hate, isn't that a strong word? Well, we have some tweets that she had going back and forth, communications, if you will, with a group called F the Police. F is the F word, the Police Boston. That's what they were known as, F the Police Boston. And she's going back and forth talking about them defunding the police. So I said, that's the worst thing you can do because Boston, particularly some of the neighborhoods like Mattapan, are troubled neighborhoods. She took exception to that. She goes, I live in Mattapan. I said, well, it's starting to look like Chicago. The night of the debate that was aired on Channel 4, WBZ, on the night of the debate, on a street next to her house, somebody got shot and killed. A young woman in her 30s, probably a drug deal gone bad, got shot and killed there. Folks, if you got gunshots in your neighborhood every night and people are dying every other week, that's a troubled neighborhood.
Yeah, for sure. I don't know, the 2 of them together sound like a bad mix, meaning Healy.
We're going to experience that bad mix.
I do have a lot of concerns. I am quite worried about the Commonwealth. I don't understand. I think what you mentioned to the viewers here is that I really need people to research these candidates, all of them, and make that better decision for all of us so that we can live I don't know, maybe a more optimistic life here in Massachusetts?
Well, I'll tell you what, we're not teaching in colleges and in high schools, we're not teaching civics anymore. We're not teaching people to think, or I should say, think critically. They teach critical race theory, but they don't teach people how to think critically and how to analyze. And we're not preparing students in our universities to function on the world, on a world scale, on the world theater as business people. And we're going to pay the price because China and Russia and our other world competitors are doing just that. They are preparing their people so that they can perform and challenge us, and they are challenging us on the
already.
world stage.
Right.
And if we are not careful, we're teaching critical race theory and we're teaching gender studies, and these other countries are teaching world dominance, economic power, and economic influence, and how to get it. And we need to wake up in this country that if we don't start competing with them, we will wind up being a third-rate country.
Wow, I mean, I knew that was happening, but I didn't think of it in that way, as to what's actually going to happen if we continue down this road. I've had little experience with going to some of the school committee meetings, and some of the things I hear, like when I found out that we actually have a full-time, they call it the DEI, or whatever it is, person that's now in the schools, and that's because it's satisfied a requirement for DESE, the Department of Education and Secondary.
Right.
I was blown away by that, because that means my tax money here in Bridgewater is paying for someone to teach that stuff to my students, or the kids in this town, and I don't think that was right.
Right.
I'd rather see them spend more money elsewhere, especially on just math and science.
Yeah, I got to tell you, if the schools would just stick to teaching the fundamentals that our students are going to need to survive as adults, instead of teaching them social engineering. And that's basically what they're doing. They're using the schools as some kind of a experimental lab at our expense and at the expense of families.
I don't. That really bothers me. So that's what it brings me, because we're getting down to our last 5 minutes here, Jay. So I was thinking, though, now that all this has occurred with the elections and the Republicans obviously lost,
Right.
But what can we do as Republicans, I guess, throughout the Commonwealth, and especially, I'm thinking more locally here to Bridgewater, because I'm part of the Republican Town Committee.
Sure.
What is it, do you see in your view that we could do to help moving forward, to help change things? I don't know, in any way, because I'm just thinking, where like voting and the way the mail-in voting occurred, I just think that is really what was our demise. But at the same time, it's like, well, what else can we do to help promote and make things better, or help the Republicans? I don't know. I just want to. I have no answers. I struggle with, like, what can we do?
Well, first of all, you got to look at the differences between the Democrats and the Republicans. This isn't meant to bash them, and this isn't meant for me to sound like I'm talking from sour grapes. But you need to discuss in your families. You need to determine what's important to you. Is loving this country, understanding what our founding fathers stood up for, that this nation, at least within the last 100 years, really has been the greatest nation on earth. We at one time, or at least from the 1990s forward, we were the most powerful nation on earth. Prior to that, we had a sort of a competition from after World War II with the Soviet Union, later becoming Russia. They literally disintegrated into about 15, 20 different countries. We were the greatest nation on earth, but we're beginning to lose that prominence. And the reason we're losing it is because we don't remember and we don't know what we've got. And we're losing our democracy. We're forgetting that although we are all individuals and we do have individual rights, we are forgetting our responsibility to
As a
make
nation,
sure, as
yeah.
a nation, to make sure we have clean government.
Yes.
Make sure that we have honest people there. And if we find out that they're not, we don't just vote down party lines. We look at and we vote for people who love this country and who are standing in integrity. You can tell the difference if you do a little research. But if you just vote your party line, that doesn't make sense for anybody.
No.
Because each party has, some have good candidates and some have absolutely deplorable candidates, and you can tell by their record.
Exactly. I totally agree with that. I even had a friend say the other day that she said, the Democrats when we were growing up are totally different from, what we have today. Because I think of JFK, like I loved that president. I thought he was awesome. But he seemed so much for the country and did everything he could for the country, and then he was assassinated. And now I don't think we have that type of mentality anymore. Like it's just I don't know what people are thinking.
In his inaugural speech, he said, "Ask not what your country can do for you. Ask what you can do for your country." That party has switched that around and said, "Get everything you can from your country.
Because we're gonna hand it to you."
Because you're entitled to it."
Yeah.
We all of a sudden get this. We're entitled to something from the government. The only thing the government is supposed to do for you, according to the Constitution, is give you life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. But you have to do the pursuing. You have to make those
to earn it.
opportunities. You earn it, you work it, and then you enjoy the fruits of your labor.
Exactly. I'm right there with you. All right, one last thing. I just know that you had mentioned to me that you probably are not going to run again, but could you explain to the, I was going to say the users because I do software, to our residents, what exactly does that mean? Or I should say to our Republicans, are you just not sure, or what are you thinking?
So here's what I tell people all the time, candidates, because I'm also a Republican state committee man. So I help other candidates, and I love helping candidates run. I love helping them campaign and all that. And I always say to people, if you lose an election, don't make any rash decisions right after the election, because all kinds of things are going in your mind. Maybe a sense of rejection, maybe a sense of why did I do this, why bother,
Could be
everything
anger.
else. Anger, yep, disappointment, depression. I didn't get that. I do get disappointment because when you run for statewide, you're all over the state, but you're making a lot of friends, and you're seeing a lot of areas of Massachusetts. We have a beautiful state.
Oh, we do.
I love going out to different places, Berkshire County and all through there, Essex
amazing.
County. Yep, and I already know Cape Cod pretty well because I live there. But I'll tell you what, I'll go out on my way out to Western Massachusetts, and I'll say to them, it's good to be out here in God's country, because it's you driving down the high, especially the Mass Pike in the daytime. It's beautiful, seeing the mountains in the background and all that stuff. So I absolutely love that. But I always caution people, don't make decisions right after the election. Give it some time. And I've always said a good place to sulk after you've lost an election is maybe down in the Caribbean, like St. Thomas or Aruba or something, because that's what I do. And I find you can sulk very well down there.
There's good rum down there, too.
That's right, absolutely. Plenty of it. It's flowing.
All right.
So as for me, I'm not going to make any decisions right now, but I'm certainly not. I'm certainly not looking to jump into the next fight as yet as a candidate. Doesn't mean I'm going away or anything. Doesn't mean I'm giving up the fight. I may be helping other people, or maybe an opportunity will come up. This opportunity was the Mass GOP has had a change, or a change in leadership the last couple of years. I kind of like the leadership. People say, yeah, but they lost. Well, yeah, but mail-in ballots came too.
Yeah.
So that both happened at the same time.
So it's hard to measure.
And the problem with Republicans is they haven't gotten into the how to harvest ballots. Oh, by the way, that's illegal. But they're doing it. They're doing it. They're taking them all, getting a stack, bringing them down the post office, mailing them to town hall, and There you
So
have it.
is like they say you have to fight fire with fire.
Sometimes you got to do that, or put like Florida did. They put an end to it. They said we're not going to do mailing ballots, no early voting. You got to vote on election day, like the Constitution says. Hey, what a novel idea!
Yeah. All right, Jay, we'll have to end there. I can't thank you enough for coming back. I really enjoyed the conversation. And again, residents, I'm glad you're here to listen to Jay. I think he's got a lot of good, a lot of experience too. So I'm happy to have you here and talk to our residents here.
Peter, it's been a pleasure. Thank you
right.
for inviting me.